Hi there, my name is João Vitor Leal and I thank you for this opportunity to share some ideas concerning the relationship between the notions of body, identity, character, and figure in narrative cinema. In this presentation, I'll be looking at 3 horror films that consciously explore this relationship. I do not have the time here to discuss each film in detail, but let me begin by summarizing their plots. In Invasion of the Body Snatchers, an alien entity silently invades a small town and starts replacing its inhabitants with identical replicas. At first, few people notice that some of their neighbors are acting a little strange, but the main character soon realizes what is going on. He learns that when they are asleep, the inhabitants have their physical appearances, personalities, and memories transferred into shapeless, inhuman bodies that gradually become identical to the original ones. The only difference is that these replicas don't show any individual emotion. They behave as iterations of the same conscious entity spread over multiple bodies. The second film I'd like to discuss is The Thing, which is also about an alien entity. However, instead of replicating the characters, the alien organism penetrates them and takes control of their bodies. The story takes place in an isolated lab, where a small group of scientists soon realizes none of them can be trusted. Just like them, the viewer can tell those who are still human from those who are already possessed by the thing. The violence here is not dissimulated, and the possession scenes are quite explicit, with the victims' bodies grotesquely disfigured. As the alien organism adapts itself into its new body, it completely exterminates the previous human owner. And finally, let us replace the alien invader by a supernatural entity and consider 2014 film It Follows. This is the story of a teenage girl who becomes cursed after being sexually molested by her boyfriend. This sexually transmitted curse takes the shape of a relentless stalker, always following her and trying to kill her. This stalker has no specific body of its own. It can appear as literally anyone, from a seemingly harmless old woman to a creepy teenage boy. The entity's physical appearance changes from scene to scene, and to make things worse, only the cursed girl is able to see it. The film is very clever in contrasting objective shots of empty space with subjective shots in which we assume her point of view and see the stalker. It's also interesting to notice that whichever body it displays, the entity is always either naked as a corpse or dressed in white as a ghost, presenting itself as an image of death. I'd like to suggest that despite their many differences, these films explore a similar figure. What is similar here is not exactly the narrative structures or visual imagery, but the underlying sensational dynamics, the way the films stimulate our memory and imagination and promote certain affective experiences. In other words, these films provide different contours to the same figure of a mismatch between bodies and identities, discovering the unknown within a very familiar shape. As the figure becomes partially visible and intelligible through its human incarnations, it both highlights and subverts the usual process of figuration in narrative cinema, a process by which an abstract entity, known as the character, acquires sensible form so that we can see it and hear it in the body, voice, and gestures of a human actor or actress. It may be that speaking of figuration in terms of incarnation makes us neglect some important aspects involved in the constitution of film characters, such as the creative work and conscious effort put in by the performers themselves. However, by insisting on this incarnation metaphor, we can better appreciate how the process of figuration is deeply rooted in Western culture, and particularly in its Christian tradition. Just as the Christians believe in Jesus as a human transubstantiation of God, naturalistic representation demands the viewer not to distinguish between film characters and those who embody them. Both the Christian tradition and narrative cinema demand some sort of belief. Even more than suspending disbelief before the fictional characters, viewers create belief before the actual bodies on the screen. Other than emphasizing this parallel between film and religion, the analyzed films also question a basic principle that governs human perception: the idea that each body corresponds to a singular personal identity. We recognize other people by recognizing their bodies, and identities are usually certified by body images and body marks, such as in photo IDs, handwritten signatures, DNA samples, and fingerprints. Whenever this correspondence between bodies and identities is disrupted, we find ourselves in an uncanny realm, colonized by doubles, shadows, echoes, spectral reflections, and all sorts of monsters. The word monster comes from the Latin and originally means to exhibit. Authors such as Mary Douglas and Michel Foucault explain that the monster reveals the different, the non-conforming, the other. What interests me in the analyzed films is that they locate this otherness within the human body itself. By making the human body duplicable, disfigurable, and interchangeable, these films postulate that the body can be emptied out of its identity, disengaged from any psychology, from its cultural background, from society, and even from its own biological conditions. I'd like to suggest that what remains of this emptied body is its flesh. Merleau-Ponty's notion of flesh describes an elementary condition of being. On the one hand, the body is that which makes us human, biologically, culturally, psychologically, and so on. On the other hand, the flesh emerges once the construct of the body is dismissed and we are exposed to the harsh reality of things. The flesh is the brutal, opaque, contingent, and irreducible condition that equals us to other animals, and also to the plants, the rocks, the wind, the light, and everything else. Therefore, the human body can be understood as a possible particular figuration of the flesh. In this phenomenological perspective, José Bragança de Miranda has defined the body as an invisible veil that keeps us away from the perils of the flesh. He states that human culture struggles to isolate, to domesticate, or to conceal the flesh deep inside the conventions of the body. Like a chameleon that changes its color to protect itself against predators, we preserve and improve our bodies to better accommodate ourselves in the world. From balanced diets and cosmetic products to plastic surgery and technological devices, we try to control our projected image. But we are destined to fail, as wounds, diseases, and old age unveil the body and remind us of the primitive state of the flesh. As I have discussed them, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing, and It Follows creatively stage this failure of the body and the threatening triumph of the flesh. The characters we see on the screen share with us a very recognizable human body, but we can no longer identify with them. Concerning the relationship between characters and figures, Xavier Garnier argues that our identification with characters is subverted into a fascination with the figure. By trying to make sense of the characters, we end up haunted by the figure that animates them. In the analyzed films, the monstrous incarnated figure exposes the human body as a fabricated image and rips this image apart. It is a fascinating and scary process of figuration, not only because it is a figure of death, but especially because it makes us experience the fundamental otherness of the flesh that ultimately constitutes our own bodies.